Mr. Whitaker, in my congressional district in Ventura County in California, the Sheriff's Department is the only public agency that currently uses UAS aside from the Navy. We have a big naval base there and future home of the Triton on the West Coast. But the Sheriff's Department has received a certificate of authorization to operate the device. They use it primarily for search and rescue. We have mountains in the district, so it's very helpful from that perspective. But every time the Sheriff's Office operates, they notify the nearby FAA air traffic control towers, and they also file a notice to airmen. And as I understand it, that's not required, but they do it They take this step out of an abundance of caution. Is that something that the FAA might consider in their rule in terms of a requirement that people who are operating UASs would have to do on a commercial basis, obviously? Yeah,
the public use UAS are really quite mature and operate in several ways that the small UAS won't be able to initially operate. The NOTAM system, I think, is an interim step to getting us to a more real-time ability to notify other users of the system. But that is, I think, the appropriate procedures at this time.
So I wanted to ask a little bit more on the COAs. I think I read in the documents that there's close to 1,700 or so COAs that have been given. So what is what's your backlog right now? What's the current demand?
I'm not sure what the actual backlog is. I can get that information for you. We have increased our throughput fairly dramatically so that we're doing over 100 a week now. So we've cleared a lot of the backlog, but they're also coming in at a pretty good clip. So we can get those numbers to you.
So do you have any idea of how many UASs are being operated without a COA? Again, commercial applications.
We don't have a way of knowing that exactly. The indications that we're getting from pilot reports gives us some glimpse into what's happening without authorization, but the numbers are too big for us to track, and we don't have those resources.
And you said that you've now, for UASs over 400 feet, or I guess over 400 feet or under 400 feet, so it's a standard
for the
contract?
Model it's 400, and for under the small rule will be 500 and below.
And so can you give me a sense of how many of these COAs that you're involved in negotiating a special contract for a specific use?
So we try to group the COAs as much as possible to expedite the processing. There have been 1,800 so far on the commercial side, and literally thousands on the public use side. So these vehicles are actually in pretty widespread use now.
And you said only 20 or so civil penalties have been.
We've had several hundred investigations. Under our compliance policy, our first preference is to get people operating in accordance with the rules, and if we don't have to use enforcement, we don't use enforcement. There have been over 20 cases now that have required us to issue civil penalties.
And what do those civil penalties look like? I mean, what can you describe?
So the baseline is up to $25,000 per incident. In the case of the penalty that went out yesterday, it was $1.9 million. It involved dozens and dozens of flights over heavily populated area.
So in terms of wildfire suppression and the use of UASs, does the FAA have any specific legislative recommendations to improve the FAA enforcement authority or to increase criminal or civil penalties for interference with wildlife?
We're evaluating with other agencies the level of the penalties involved. Right now, it's $25,000 on the civil side, up to $250,000 and 20 years in prison on the criminal side. That level is being evaluated interagency. The biggest challenge we think the most bang for the buck comes from education, because a lot of the operations are inadvertent. And on the enforcement side, the real challenge is how we locate the operators of the vehicle.
And on the education piece, in terms of know before you fly, the educational program materials, is there any legal barrier that prevents the FAA from requiring manufacturers to include the safety information and packaging?
We're prohibited from regulating for recreational use drones It's possible that we could do a rulemaking around that, but the time frame of rulemakings is such it's not a particularly viable tool for us. So we're very much focused on voluntary compliance at this point.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Hanna.
Thank you.